Back in my social worker days on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a friend gave me a copy of Dr. Oliver Sacks's book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Dr. Sacks practiced and taught in New York City for many years. In fact, the New York Times called him the poet laureate of medicine, because not only was his practice so groundbreaking, his stories of his patients were engaging and alive. There was the doctor with Tourette's syndrome, who, when he went into surgery, inexplicably lost all of the tics and the language outbursts that come along with Tourette's. Or there was an artist who went colorblind. Or maybe the radical who was stuck in 1969. And then Dr. Sacks told about Virgil. Virgil was a blind man who navigated through life very successfully. He had his own job, he had his own apartment, he had a relationship with a good woman. Everything was going great for Virgil until he had a minor surgery that restored his eyesight. And that's the beginning of his troubles. You see, Virgil spent his life as a non-sighted person. He knew how to navigate his home and the streets of New York. It was when he became sighted that everything became foreign to him. You see, you and I have had a lifetime of making associations with objects and our reality around us. But when Virgil saw a tree, it was just a thing. It wasn't an association that made sense to him. When he saw the faces of his loved ones, it didn't make a connection. Virgil became virtually dependent as a sighted person on everyone around him. He was lost because he gained his sight. I remember some years ago when my wife had her first cochlear implant at Westchester Medical Center. Her audiologist had a saying on his wall that went something like this: blindness separates people from things. Deafness separates people from people. As children, I remember we used to ask ourselves, would it be better to be blind or to lose one's hearing? What would be worse? In the story today that comes from John's Gospel, chapter 9, Jesus restores the sight of a blind man. And like Virgil, that's when his troubles really began. The first question arises when Jesus' own disciples ask him, "Teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born this way?" Isn't it funny that we have traversed so very little over 2,000 years in terms of our understanding of cause and effect? We're still looking for an answer to life's problems. The coronavirus arises and becomes a worldwide pandemic. And we're still asking the same questions. Whose fault is it? It has to be someone's fault. It couldn't just have happened on its own. Some TV evangelists are already decrying gay marriage as the reason that the coronavirus has arisen. But we know that's a nonsensical answer. No, these things happen because we live in a world, don't we? I remember a wonderful story told by Charlotte Wexler. She was a blind woman living again in New York City. After a particularly harsh winter, she was anxious to get outside in the warm spring weather, and on a beautiful day, she ventured out of her apartment and decided to take a walk. She went to the nearest street corner, and as she waited for the light to turn, a man approached her and stood beside her. "May I accompany you across the street?" he asked. She thought, what a kind gesture that a sighted person would do that for a blind person. As they walked across the street, they talked about the beautiful spring weather and life in New York City. And when he reached the other side, they chatted for a moment. And before he left, he told Charlotte, "You know, not many people would take the time to walk a blind man like me across the street." Isn't that a wonderful story? You and I are blessed to live in a world with so many visually exciting things to see. But sometimes we can be blind, can't we? They call it willful blindness. We've seen it in our country. A decade ago, we willfully were blind to the fact that bankers were giving out huge sums of money to people who couldn't afford mortgages. Or there was the weapons of mass destruction that really turned out to be nothing at all. We're willfully blind to the things around us. Do you remember, not long ago, there was a movie about the life of the great musician Ray Charles. You know, Ray Charles was a blind man, and he integrated gospel and other strains of African American music into this wonderful, engaging style. But of course, he wrestled with his own disability, with his own blindness. At one point, his wife tries to placate him and tries to get him to make peace with God. And there's a part where Ray says to his wife, "Me and God, we're even." Speaking of his blindness, "Me and God, we're even. I'll do as I damn well please." That's us in this Lenten season. Isn't it true? We do as we damn well please. We smoke. We know it's not good for us. We text while we're driving. We know it's dangerous. Some of us drink sweet tea and try to justify it with exercise. We know sugar's not good for us. They call it willful blindness. In this season of Lent, in this time of coronavirus, I'm encouraging you to see. See your family and friends around you. See your relationship with God. See one another as they really are. Open your arms and your eyes to the world around you, to put aside that willful blindness and see life and see reality and see your faith as it truly can be. Do you remember that old song? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.